Welcome to the Fundamentals of Fitness, the podcast where we strip away the noise, the guilt, and the unrealistic expectations around health and fitness, and we focus on what actually works instead. I'm Alison, your no-nonsense coach. So whether you're out on a walk, driving to work, or just taking a bit of time for yourself, settle in, because today we're going to talk about something that seems really small, but changes everything: your momentum. Most people think fitness changes through big moments, the big decisions, the big transformations, the big burst of motivation, that dramatic restart, the right, that's it, this time I'm doing it properly moment. But real change usually doesn't happen like that. Real change is much quieter, and it happens through small wins, small actions, repeated often, until they start to build evidence, and that evidence becomes belief. And that belief becomes your momentum. Momentum is powerful because once you have it, everything feels easier. Not easy, but easier. Training feels less like a battle. Food choices feel less chaotic. Getting back on track feels faster. And your identity starts to shift from I'm trying to do this to I'm someone who does this. But the mistake most people make is that they wait for the big motivation before they start. They wait to feel ready, they wait to feel confident, and they wait for the perfect week. And while they're waiting, nothing builds. Because momentum doesn't appear before action. Momentum comes from action. So today we're going to break down why small wins matter, what happens in your brain when you repeat them, how athletes use momentum in training, and how you can build it in real life without needing perfect conditions. Because success doesn't start with huge overhaul. It starts with one repeatable action, done again and again and again. So as usual, pop on those trainers or grab that cuppa and let's dive right in. So why do small wins matter more than big starts? And most people underestimate small wins. They think they don't count. They think that a 10-minute walk isn't enough. They think one balanced meal doesn't matter. They think one workout won't change anything. And technically, you're probably right. One workout won't transform your body. One walk won't radically change your fitness. And one high-protein breakfast won't suddenly rebuild your metabolism. But that's not the point, right? The point of a small win is not that it changes everything physically in one moment. The point is that it changes the direction of your behaviour. And direction matters. Because if you can create a small win, you create evidence. Evidence that you can do what you said you would do. Evidence that you can act even when things aren't perfect. And evidence that you can keep promises to yourself. And that evidence matters because confidence doesn't come from thinking about change. Confidence comes from proving change to yourself. There is a problem with big starts, and they feel exciting. They feel clean. They feel powerful. You know the type. Right, Monday, I'm starting properly. I'm cutting everything out. I'm training 5 times a week. I'm doing cardio every morning. I'm meal prepping every meal. And for a short time, that can feel amazing because the intensity creates the excitement. But big starts often come with a hidden problem. They are expensive. Maybe not financially, but energetically. They demand a lot from your body, your mind, your time, and your routine. And if the plan requires a version of you who is perfectly rested, perfectly organized, perfectly motivated, and perfectly calm, it probably won't survive real life. Because real life interrupts. Work gets busy. Sleep gets disrupted. Kids need things. Clients need things. Stress builds. Energy dips. And suddenly the big plan becomes too heavy to carry. That's when people stop. Not because they didn't care, but because the system was too demanding. Small wins lower the barrier. Small wins are different. Small wins reduce the friction. They make action easier to repeat. And in behaviour change, repeatability is everything. A 10-minute walk might not be impressive, but it is repeatable. A basic protein target is not glamorous, but it is repeatable. A simple gym session is not dramatic, but it is repeatable. And repeated behaviours are what build results. This is where a lot of people get fitness backwards. They chase the most impressive plan, when what actually really needs the attention is the most repeatable plan. Because the body responds to what you do consistently, not what you do dramatically for a week. Let's have a look at reinforcement and self-efficacy. These are really important psychological concepts. Self-efficacy is your belief in your ability to do something. And it matters because people are more likely to repeat behaviours they believe they can successfully perform. Small wins build this self-efficacy. They tell your brain, I can do this. And that matters. Because if your plan constantly makes you feel like you're failing, your confidence drops. But if your plan gives you repeated proof that you can follow through, your confidence will grow. And when confidence grows, consistency becomes easier. Not because the work becomes effortless, but because you stop doubting whether or not you're capable. So let's look at Eliud Kipchoge and the power of repetition. And think about Eliud Kipchoge. He is one of the greatest marathon runners of all time. But his success isn't built on random heroic efforts. It's built on repetition, structured training, controlled pacing, consistent habits, day after day, week after week, month after month. The world sees the marathon, the finish line, the record attempts, the huge moments. But those moments are built from thousands of smaller actions that nobody sees. The easy runs, the recovery session, the sleep, the fueling, the discipline to repeat the boring things. And that's the lesson. Big performances are built from small, repeated behaviours. I had a client who used to wait for the perfect week. If Monday went badly, he would write off the week. If he missed a workout, he would say, I'll restart next week, it's fine. And that meant that he was consistently starting over. So we changed his goal. Instead of aiming for the perfect week, we aimed for small wins. One walk, one workout, one protein-focused meal, one check-in. And the rule was simple, don't restart, just continue. That changed his way of thinking. That changed everything for him. Because instead of seeing one missed session as failure, he started seeing one completed action as momentum. And over time, that momentum builds. His training became more consistent. His food choices became less emotional. And more importantly, he stopped seeing himself as someone who always falls off track. That identity shift came from small wins, not a perfect plan. So what does this mean for you? If you are struggling to stay consistent, stop asking, what's the biggest change I can make? Ask, what's the smallest action I can repeat? Because the smallest repeatable action is the most powerful. It's more powerful than the biggest unsustainable plan. Momentum doesn't need drama. It needs repetition. What does momentum do to your brain? Momentum feels emotional, but it's also neurological. When you repeat an action, your brain begins to learn the patterns. It starts linking cue, behaviour, and reward. And over time, that pattern becomes easier to repeat. That's why habit matters. Not because they're magically making life perfect, but because they reduce the amount of mental effort required to act. At the start, a behaviour takes a lot of conscious effort. You have to think about it, plan it, talk yourself into it, negotiate with yourself. But once a behaviour becomes familiar, it requires less mental energy. And that's when momentum starts to feel easier. A lot of people think dopamine is simply a pleasure chemical, but dopamine is more about motivation, anticipation, learning, and reward prediction. Your brain pays attention to actions that seem rewarding, and if an action gives you a sense of progress, control, or achievement, your brain is more likely to want to repeat it. This is why small wins are so important. They provide quick evidence of success. Not huge success, maybe, but enough to create a reward signal. If you tick the workout off your list, you hit your steps, you prep your lunch, you drink water, you complete the small thing, and your brain registers. That felt good. That workout. We did what we said we would do. That matters. Because repeated small wins creates a feedback loop. Action creates reward, and reward increases the likelihood of repeat action. Repeat action creates momentum. So why does waiting for motivation fail? And most people wait for motivation before they act. But motivation is unstable. It changes with sleep, stress, hormones, mood, environment, workload, weather. So if your consistency depends on motivation, your results will always be inconsistent. Momentum works differently. Momentum says, act first, motivation follows. And this is a huge mindset shift. You don't wait to feel motivated to move. You move, and the movement creates a little motivation. You don't wait to feel confident to train. You train, and the training builds confidence. You don't wait to feel like that person. You act like that person in small ways, and eventually your identity catches up. So your brain loves evidence. Your brain is constantly collecting evidence about who you are. If you repeatedly skip sessions, your brain learns that I'm someone who skips. If you repeatedly restart every Monday, your brain learns I'm someone who restarts. But if you repeatedly do something, even something small, your brain learns I'm someone who continues. That is powerful. Because identity is not built through intention. It's built through repeated evidence. This is why tiny actions matter. They are not tiny to your brain. They are votes for your identity. Let's have another athlete example. Serena Williams and her competitive momentum. Let's think about her. Across Serena's career, one of the things that made her so formidable was not just physical ability. It was her competitive momentum. When she started winning points, you could feel the matches shift. Momentum in tennis is fascinating because it's both psychological and behavioral. One strong point creates confidence. Confidence influences decision-making. Decision-making influences the execution, and the execution influences the next point. And suddenly, the athlete is not just playing well physically, they are operating with belief. But that momentum still starts with a small unit, 1 point, 1 serve, 1 return, 1 decision. Fitness is the same. You don't build a whole transformation in 1 leap. You build it 1 decision at a time. I've had several clients who've struggled with the all or nothing thinking. If she had 1 off-plan meal, she would think, I've ruined it. And then that would lead to more off-plan choices. Not because she didn't care, it was because emotionally she had already decided the day was lost. So we changed her target. The goal became win the next choice. Not the whole day, just the next choice. If lunch didn't go as planned, the next win might be drinking water, or walking after work, or having a balanced dinner. That tiny shift interrupted that spiral, and each time she chose the next small win, momentum returned faster. That is what small wins do. They shorten the distance between slipping and returning. So let's have a look at a physiology link, stress and decision-making. This matters even more when stress is high. When you are tired or stressed, your brain is more likely to choose familiar patterns. That's not weakness. That's physiology. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain involved in planning and self-control, is more vulnerable to fatigue and stress. So when you're overwhelmed, it becomes harder to make deliberate choices. This is why simple habits matter. If the action is too complicated, stress will beat it. But if the action is simple and familiar, you are more likely to follow through. That's why a small win is not a low standard. It's a smart strategy. So what then does this mean for you? If you want momentum, make the first action obvious. Make it small. Make it repeatable. Don't ask your stressed brain to reinvent something every day. Give it a simple pathway. Same training days, simple meals, one minimum standard. Small wins, repeated often. That's how momentum becomes easier. So why do small wins change your identity? And this is where momentum becomes more than behaviour. It becomes identity. At first, you do the action. Then the action starts to change how you see yourself. You go from I'm trying to get consistent to I am becoming consistent. Then eventually, I am someone who trains. That shift is really important because once something becomes part of your identity, you negotiate with it less. You don't have to debate every single action. You don't have to start from scratch emotionally every week. You have a baseline, a standard, and a sense of self that supports the behaviour. Most people try and change identity through declarations. This is my year. I'm going to be disciplined. I'm finally going to become that person. But declarations don't change your identity. Evidence does. Every time you take action, you create evidence. Every walk, every session, every time you get back on track, every time you choose structure over chaos, you are telling yourself, this is who I am becoming. And over time, that evidence becomes difficult to ignore. So why big goals can feel too far away? And big goals are useful, but they can also feel really distant. Lose 20 kilos, run a marathon, get stronger, feel confident, improve performance. These goals can be inspiring, but they don't always help you know what to do today. Small wins bring the goals closer. They turn the future into something you can act on right now. A marathon starts with today's run. A stronger body starts with today's session. Better nutrition starts with the next meal. Confidence starts with the next promise you keep. Cristiano Ronaldo is often discussed in terms of talent, but what has made him exceptional across such a long career is not just talent alone. It is standards, training, recovery, nutrition, preparation, repetition. The reason this matters is because longevity in sport doesn't come from one big effort. It comes from standards repeated for years. Ronaldo's identity as an athlete is reinforced daily through behaviours. And while most listeners are not trying to become professional footballers, the same principles apply. Your standards shape your identity shapes your behaviour, and your behaviour shapes your results. I had a wonderful client who used to say, I'm just not a gym goer. That was how she felt of her identity. So every time training felt awkward, it confirmed this belief in herself. Every time she felt unsure, it confirmed that belief. Every time she missed a session, it just confirmed that belief. So we didn't start by trying to make her love the gym. We started with small, manageable sessions, short, structured, achievable. The goal was not to destroy her in training. The goal was to create evidence that she could show up, she could achieve, and she could do something structured. After a few weeks, something changed. She didn't say, I love the gym now. She said, I suppose I do train regularly now. That sentence mattered because her identity had started to shift, not because of one huge session, but because of the repeated small wins we received. You see, momentum is not about perfection, but it does need protecting. This is why the all or nothing mindset is so damaging. One missed session becomes a missed week. One unplanned meal becomes an abandoned weekend. And one stressful day becomes a complete loss of structure. The problem is not the first moment. The problem is the story you attach to it. If the story is "I've failed," momentum breaks. If the story is "I continue from here," momentum survives. That is the skill, not avoiding every slip, but returning quickly. Think about Formula One. A driver like Lewis Hamilton can have a difficult qualifying session, a poor start, or a challenging race phase. But elite drivers cannot afford to emotionally collapse after one setback. They have to reset quickly. Corner by corner, lap by lap, decision by decision. In motorsport, momentum can shift quickly. But the best drivers are able to return to process. They don't take one mistake and let it define the next 10 decisions. And this is exactly what everyday fitness requires. You don't need a perfect week. You need the ability to reset quickly. The faster you reset, the less momentum you lose. So what then does this mean for you? If you want to build a fitness identity, stop waiting until you feel like that person. Start collecting evidence. Ask yourself, what is one action I can take today that proves I am becoming someone who looks after their health? It might be small. It might not be impressive. But if repeated, it becomes powerful, because small wins don't just change what you do, they change who you believe you are. So how do you actually build momentum? Not in theory, in real life. When you're busy, when you're tired, when your week is messy, when motivation is average. This is where we need a practical system, because momentum doesn't build by accident. You design for it. Step 1, lower your starting barrier. The first step is to make the first action easy. Not because you're lazy, because starting is often the hardest part. Once you start, continuing is easier. This is known as activation energy. The more difficult a behaviour feels to start, the less likely you are to do it. So lower the starting barrier. Instead of "I need to do a full workout," try "I need to start the warm-up." Instead of "I need to sort my whole diet out," try "I need to plan breakfast." Instead of "I need to get 10,000 steps," try "I need to take a 10-minute walk." Small starts create motion. Motion creates momentum. Step 2, create a minimum standard. This links beautifully with the consistency system. You need a minimum standard, a baseline that keeps you in the game. Your minimum standard might be 10 minutes of movement, a protein target, a short walk, one structured meal, one gym session per week during stressful periods. The purpose of the minimum standard is not maximum progress. It is continuity. It prevents the complete stop, and preventing the stop is huge. Because restarting is emotionally expensive, continuing, even at a lower level, protects your identity. Step 3, stack your wins. Momentum grows when wins stack together. You walk, then you drink water, then you eat a decent meal, then you train, then you sleep better. Each action makes the next one slightly easier. This is why a morning routine can be really powerful, not because mornings are magical, but because early wins create behavioural momentum. If the first part of your day feels structured, the next choice often becomes easier. One of my clients used something we called the 3-win rule. On busy days, she doesn't need to do everything. She just needed 3 wins. For example, a 20-minute walk, protein with lunch, bedtime before 10:30. That was it. 3 wins. Not perfect, but enough. And because the target felt achievable, she did it more often. And that created her momentum. And momentum created her consistency. Step 4, make progress visible. Small wins need to be seen, and if you don't track them, you forget them. And if you forget them, you underestimated yourself. This is why simple tracking helps, not obsessive tracking, evidence tracking. Tick off your workouts, write down your wins. Notice when you recover faster. Record when you choose differently, because your brain needs proof, especially if you're someone who tends to focus on what you haven't done. You need a system that shows you what you have. Step 5, protect momentum after disruption. This might be the most important step for you. Momentum is tested when life interrupts. A busy week, a holiday, illness, stress, family commitments, work pressure. The goal is not to avoid disruption. The goal is to return quickly. Have a reset rule. For example, never miss twice. Or next meal back to structure. Or one walk within 24 hours. Or book the next session immediately. These rules prevent one disruption becoming a full stop. See, Simone Biles is an incredible example of understanding pressure, regulation, and performance. What stands out is not just her physical ability, but her awareness of when performance requires regulation, not just force. High performers understand that momentum is not blind pushing. It is staying connected to process. Sometimes that means pushing. Sometimes it means pausing. Sometimes it means resetting. For everyday fitness, that lesson matters. Momentum does not mean never stopping to breathe. It means knowing how to return to the path. In behavioural psychology, momentum is often linked to repeated successful responses. The more often you perform a behaviour successfully, the more likely it becomes that you'll continue performing it. That's why success needs to be achievable. If your targets are constantly too big, you experience repeated failure. That weakens your momentum. If your targets are achievable but meaningful, you experience repeated success. That strengthens momentum. This is why we don't build consistency by setting impossible standards. We build it by setting repeatable ones. So if you want momentum, make success easier to access, not meaningless. Not lazy, but accessible. Start smaller than your ego wants. Repeat it longer than your motivation lasts. Build evidence, then build from there. Momentum is not built from one massive push. It's built from actions that are easy enough to repeat and meaningful enough to matter. Momentum changes everything, because when you have it, fitness stops feeling like a constant restart. You stop needing a perfect Monday. You stop waiting for motivation. You stop relying on dramatic bursts of effort, and you start building something much more powerful. Trust. Trust in yourself. Trust in your system. Trust that small actions are not pointless. Trust that progress can be built quietly, because small wins are not small when they are repeated. They become habits, they become identity, and they become results. And that's how long-term change actually happens. Not through one perfect week, not through one heroic session, and not through one dramatic restart, but through the small things you do consistently enough to become the person you're trying to become. So this week, don't ask, what huge change do I need to make? Ask, what small win can I repeat? Because that might be the thing that changes everything. And if this episode has helped you rethink the power of small wins, share it with someone who keeps waiting for the perfect time to start. Because the perfect time is rarely what changes things. The first small action does. And if you're building long-term strength, health, and performance, make sure you're following the fundamentals of fitness so you don't miss what's coming next. And next week, we're going to be talking about the time myth, why most people think they don't have time, and what's actually going on underneath that belief. Until then, train with structure, recover with intention, and build something that lasts. I'll see you in the next one.